The dust motes danced in the single shaft of sunlight cutting through the gloom of the attic. When my hand brushed against that forgotten wooden box, a shiver ran down my spine. Inside, nestled amongst yellowed lace and brittle photographs, was a tiny, tarnished silver key. A clue that transformed the quiet family historian I was into the relentless seeker of truth I became. Good morning, my dears. I'm Eleanor Vance. I'm 82 years old, and today I'm going to share with you a story I've kept hidden for almost 60 years. But before I begin, if you're watching this, please don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the Grandma's True Moments channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. This helps me continue sharing my stories with you all. It was 1964, and I was only 22 years old. America was in a whirlwind of change, rock and roll, and the looming shadows of Vietnam. But in our old Victorian house in Vermont, life moved with the slow, predictable rhythm of a grandfather clock. I had been married for a year to Thomas, a man from a respected, old-money family. He was a junior partner at his father's law firm, always wore perfectly tailored suits, and was considered a pillar of the community. Our house, inherited from his great-grandparents, stood stately on Elm Street, surrounded by ancient oak trees. We had no children yet, but our nursery was painted a soft cream, awaiting the future. I was what they called the dutiful wife back then. I woke up before everyone to prepare breakfast. The smell of strong coffee and bacon filled the house while I laid out Thomas's newspaper and polished silver. Thomas had his tea while reading the morning paper delivered by young Billy, the paper boy. After he left for work, I managed the household staff, planned dinner parties, and in my free time, I delved into local history, particularly our family's genealogy. It was my grandmother who instilled in me a love for the past. She said, "Always know where you come from, child, for it tells you where you are going." Little did she know how profoundly this advice would steer my destiny. Our life seemed idyllic in the eyes of others. Thomas was courteous, bought me delicate pearl necklaces on anniversaries, and there was never a want for anything. But behind closed doors, there were unspoken expectations, guarded conversations, and that nagging feeling that a significant piece of our shared history was missing. He travelled frequently for legal conferences, especially on the third Tuesday of each month. Important client meetings, he vaguely explained. I believed him, or perhaps I chose to believe. After all, challenging him wasn't encouraged in his family. Once when I inquired about the details of a particularly long trip, he looked at me with an unnerving calm and said, "You have a comfortable home and a respected name. You don't need to concern yourself with such matters." On that crisp autumn Saturday, October 24th, 1964, my life changed forever. I remember perfectly because it was the day I had planned to organize the attic, a task I had put off for months. Thomas had left earlier, saying he needed to review some urgent documents at the firm before a major land deal closed the following week. I was alone at home, a rare and welcome solitude. The old attic, filled with the ghosts of generations past, was my sanctuary. Thomas rarely ventured up there, declaring it a dusty repository of sentimentality. The door was always unlocked. But I suppose he never imagined I would spend hours sifting through his family's forgotten treasures. That day, however, I was determined to bring order to the chaos. I entered the attic, the air heavy with the scent of cedar and aged paper. Sunlight filtered through the grimy window panes, illuminating trails of dust. I began by organizing old trunks, filled with exquisite antique clothing. Among them, tucked behind a wedding dress from the 1890s, I found a small, intricately carved wooden box. It wasn't locked, but its clasp was stiff with age. As I lifted the lid, a small silver key, no bigger than my thumbnail, tumbled out onto the floor. My first instinct was to simply put it back. It was probably just an old trinket, a forgotten bauble. But something compelled me to pick up that key. With a sudden tremor in my hands, I turned it over. The metal was cool and heavy, intricately wrought with a tiny, almost invisible initial, R. I felt the blood rush from my head. The musty smell of the attic seemed to intensify, replaced by a strange clarity. My legs weakened, and I had to sit on an old velvet trunk to avoid fainting. Who was I? What did this key unlock? 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind in those seconds that seemed like an eternity. Carefully, I placed the key back in the box, reclosing it and hiding it under a pile of linens. I spent the rest of the afternoon organizing, but my mind was elsewhere. When Thomas returned late in the afternoon, I had already made my decision. I would not confront him directly. That tiny key, that single initial, felt like a secret too fragile and potentially dangerous to expose prematurely. Instead, I would pretend nothing had happened while discovering the truth on my own. That night, I served dinner as always. I listened to Thomas's recounting of his day at the firm and laughed politely at his dry legal jokes. On the outside, I was the same Eleanor as always. On the inside, something had fundamentally shifted. The following days were an exercise in calculated observation. I kept the routine intact. Breakfast prepared early, household staff supervised, dinner on the table at 7 sharp. But I began paying meticulous attention to every detail, every casual remark, every subtle gesture. I noticed how Thomas kept his office study locked when he left. How he quickly folded certain letters when I entered the room. How he spoke in hushed tones on the phone when he thought I was preoccupied with household duties. Small details that previously went unnoticed now screamed at me. A week after finding the key, I had my first concrete discovery. I was tidying his study, a forbidden zone Thomas usually handled himself, when I found a small, leather-bound journal tucked beneath a stack of legal tomes. It was not Thomas's handwriting. The elegant, flowing script was unfamiliar. I recognized it immediately. The message was short and unsettling. A's lament, July 1903. I felt a jolt. The headache seemed to have disappeared, replaced by a strange numbness. My legs weakened, and I had to sit in his armchair to avoid fainting. Who was her? Was it the same as on the key? What lament was so powerful that it deserved its own journal? 1,000 questions flooded my mind in those seconds that seemed like an eternity. Carefully, I put the journal back exactly where I found it, beneath the legal books, and returned to my own research, pretending to be engrossed in a book on colonial architecture. But my mind was racing. When Thomas returned later, I had already made my decision. I would not confront him directly. If that journal and key met what I feared, questioning Thomas could be dangerous. Instead, I would pretend nothing had happened while discovering the truth on my own. That night, I served dinner as always. I listened to Thomas's stories about his day at the firm and smiled at his predictable anecdotes. On the outside, I was the same Eleanor as always. On the inside, something had irrevocably changed. The following days were a study in calculated stealth. I maintained my daily routine, a meticulous ballet of household duties and social obligations. But now, every moment was an opportunity for investigation. I became a shadow in my own home, observing, listening, piecing together the fragmented clues. I noticed how Thomas's family photographs, meticulously arranged in the drawing room, skipped an entire generation. There were portraits of his grandparents, then directly to his parents. No aunts, no uncles, no cousins from that particular line. Small details that previously went unnoticed now screamed at me. A week after discovering the journal, I had my next crucial lead. I was preparing a tea service for Thomas's mother, a formidable woman who oversaw the family's social calendar, when I overheard a hushed conversation between her and her sister, Aunt Beatrice, in the parlour. "The old cottage by the lake," Aunt Beatrice whispered. "Still locked up, isn't it? A shame, really. Such a beautiful place. But of course, after everything ... For dear Amelia's sake, I felt a jolt. The old cottage by the lake. A property I knew was technically part of the family estate, but was always kept firmly off limits, shrouded in vague stories of structural instability. Amelia, the initialer. My heart pounded. Could it be? I memorized this information and continued arranging the tea, feigning complete ignorance. My heart ached, but my resolve only grew stronger. I began creating excuses to visit the family library, a vast repository of local history and family archives. I needed to research the local land deeds for a historical society project, wanted to find old maps of the county, had to verify historical property lines. With each visit, I tried to discover more about the mysterious cottage and the name Amelia. It was on my third visit that I found it. Tucked away in a dusty ledger of turn-of-the-century property records, I found a deed for the lake cottage. Owner, Amelia Vance, date of transfer, 1904, and in the margin, a handwritten note. Occupant until 1903, sealed thereafter, I felt as if I had been slapped. Amelia Vance, the same surname as Thomas. Occupant until 1903, the exact year A's Lumet was written. And sealed thereafter. It all fit. I returned home that day with a heavy heart, but with a growing certainty. There was a hidden history, a family secret, and I was determined to uncover it. In the following days, I continued my silent investigation. I befriended old Mrs. Gable, the retired town archivist, a sweet woman with an encyclopedic memory for local families. Through seemingly casual conversations during our meetings at the Historical Society or over tea, I collected information about the Vance family's past. "Oh, the old lake cottage," she commented innocently after a lecture on early Vermont settlers. "Such a sad story, that. Dear Amelia, Thomas's great-aunt. Such a talented artist, but so frail. Died young, you know. They say she never recovered from the heartbreak of losing her intended. The family rarely spoke of it after 1903. The pieces started fitting together, forming a disturbing picture. Amelia, the artist. The heartbreak. The cottage by the lake. And the key. What did this all mean? That's when I remembered a small, ornamental box on Thomas's father's desk, always kept locked. At the time, when I asked what it contained, he vaguely dismissed it as old family papers and quickly changed the subject. Now that box gained new meaning. I waited until Thomas left for work and his parents were out for their weekly bridge game, and I began searching. The silver key from the attic was indeed the key to this box. It wasn't in the locked study, nor in the pockets of his suits, nor in the important document safe. Finally, I found it hidden inside a false bottom of an old humidor in Thomas's father's library. Ironically, a humidor supposedly filled with rare cigars. The key opened a small metal box hidden at the bottom of the humidor, beneath a few old, dry cigars. Inside, I found more evidence of the hidden history. A collection of faded letters tied with a silk ribbon, a miniature portrait of a young woman with intense, artistic eyes, and a small, delicate silver locket. The letters were from Amelia Vance, dated between 1899 and 1903. The last letter was the most recent, dated just weeks before her supposed death. "My dearest love, I grow weaker each day, but my heart beats only for you. The family threatens to send me away, to silence our truth. But I will never forget our promise. Our child, though hidden, will carry our love. Find the key, my love, unlock our story. All my love, Amelia." Tears ran down my face as I read. Not for Amelia, but for the profound sadness of a love brutally suppressed. And worse, a child, hidden. If this truth came to light, it would not only shake the foundations of Thomas's prestigious family, but also rewrite generations of history. At that moment, sitting on the library floor with the evidence of a century-old secret in my hands, I made a decision that would change the course of my life forever. I would not be a passive observer. I would not allow this hidden story to remain buried. I would use everything I discovered to uncover the full truth and understand my own place within this complex tapestry. Carefully, I put everything back as it was and locked the box, returning it to its hiding place. The silver key went back to its resting place in the attic. Nothing would reveal that I had discovered the truth. Now I had only a short time before the big land deal closed, before the family's attention shifted. A short time to elaborate my own plan. And while preparing dinner that night, smiling at Thomas as if nothing had changed, I already knew what I needed to do. Looking back today, I see how that forgotten box was actually a blessing in disguise. If I hadn't gone up to the attic, if that key hadn't fallen that way, if that letter hadn't slipped into my hands, my story would have a very different ending. And you, my dears, have you ever had a moment in life when a small, forgotten clue revealed a great truth? Leave it in the comments. I love reading your stories. After discovering the whole truth, I spent the night awake. Thomas slept peacefully beside me, his heavy sleep of someone who carries no conscious guilt. And I, lying with eyes open, saw the moonlight enter through the window while planning each step of the following days. I had exactly a few weeks until the date of the major land deal, before Thomas's family would be too preoccupied to notice my investigations. Weeks to act before the trail grew colder. Weeks to save the truth for Amelia's hidden child. Early the next morning, I began executing my plan. First, I needed to confirm my suspicions about Amelia. I couldn't depend on the vague stories from Mrs. Gable. Luckily, I had access to the family's vast library, a trove of old newspapers and town records. Women of my time didn't have independent research funds. I commented to my History Society mentor, Dr. Albright, while discussing our upcoming research project. Thomas says we don't need independent funding, that he takes care of everything. Nonsense, Eleanor, she exclaimed. Every researcher needs her own resources. I'll get you access to the city archives tomorrow. Thomas and his father will never know. That's how I gained access to birth certificates, death records, and marriage licenses from the turn of the century. I spent hours meticulously cross-referencing names and dates. It wasn't just Amelia's death in 1903 that was suspicious. There was a gap in the birth records for that specific year, a missing child from a prominent family. It seemed little to restart a life, but it was a beginning. The second step was to collect further evidence. I needed solid proof of the hidden child, not just the love letters and the locket. If something went wrong and Thomas noticed my intentions, I would be the overly imaginative wife delving into old gossip. On mornings when Thomas left earlier for work, I would sneak into his father's study. Careful to leave everything exactly as I found it, I photographed documents with a small camera I had bought discreetly. It was a simple Instamatic that fit in the palm of my hand, easy to hide among my research notes and history books. Each new document revealed more details of the cover-up. The family had meticulously expunged Amelia's story, replacing her early death with a narrative of a frail constitution. But photographing wasn't enough. I needed copies of the original documents. That's when I remembered Mr. Henderson, owner of the only printing shop in town. His two daughters studied with Michael and his wife was my client. I made up a story about wanting to make a surprise historical album for Thomas's upcoming birthday with copies of important family documents. Mrs. Vance, you know I can't let anyone use the copy machine without authorization, he said, scratching his head. I understand perfectly, Mr. Henderson, I replied with my best smile. It's just that I wanted to make a surprise. I have old maps, historical blueprints of the house, and I wanted to copy them before Thomas came home from work. I mentioned I would arrange a feature on his shop in the Historical Society newsletter as a thank you, and the good man gave in. That afternoon, while Thomas was at work, I copied the most important documents that proved the cover-up. The third step of my plan was the most difficult, finding someone trustworthy to help me. It couldn't be just anyone in town. Thomas and his father's tentacles reached all important corners. The local sheriff played golf with them on Saturdays. The mayor was a distant cousin. The local newspaper editor was financially beholden to the firm. That's when I remembered Detective Inspector Davies, a man from the state capital who periodically investigated high-profile cases. Thomas always complained about him, calling him the unnecessarily thorough busybody. He was exactly the type of person I needed. I discovered he would be in the region the following week for a routine investigation of a local embezzlement case. Through Mrs. Gable, the retired archivist, I learned he would be staying at the small town inn for 3 days. I carefully prepared an envelope with copies of the most important documents, photos, and a letter explaining the whole situation. But how to deliver it without raising suspicions? The inn was across from the central square where everyone would see me if I entered there. The solution came through my good friend, Mrs. Jenkins, who owned the local flower shop. I organised a large order for a historical society event, offering to pick up the flowers at the inn after school. What a beautiful new vase, Mrs. Jenkins, I commented to the proprietor. This would coordinate perfectly with the centerpiece I'm planning for the mayor's dinner. Could you lend it to me so I can measure the opening? I promised to return it today. She lent me the vase, and when I returned it later, the envelope was hidden in the inner lining. Along with it, I placed a note asking her to deliver it to Inspector Davies when he arrived without mentioning my name. The fourth step was to prepare our future. If everything went well, Thomas's family's reputation would be tarnished, but what would become of me? A woman who exposed such a scandal in 1964 would face closed doors everywhere. I reconnected with my childhood friend, Clara, who lived in Boston and had a small antique shop. I didn't tell the whole truth, just that my marriage was on shaky ground and I would need work soon. Come here, Eleanor. I really need a partner with your eye for history. "There's a small room at the back of the shop where you can stay until you get established," she said without asking many questions. True friends are like that. They extend a hand first and ask questions later. Meanwhile, I continued my normal life. I prepared Thomas's favorite meals, entertained his family, did my historical research. At night, when everyone was asleep, I packed a small valise with the essentials and mentally calculated how long it would take to reach Boston if I needed to leave in a hurry. The week flew by. Thomas was increasingly preoccupied, frequently meeting his father at the firm outside working hours. On the eve of the land deal, I noticed him watching me during dinner with a strange, almost melancholic look. Was he sensing something? On Wednesday, one day before the land deal closed, I received a discreet sign that my plan was working. Mrs. Jenkins stopped by my house with the excuse of discussing a new flower arrangement. Inspector Davies asked for extra historical documents today about all land transfers from the turn of the century, she whispered while I arranged the new vase. Mr. Vance Sr. and Thomas are white as paper. My heart raced. The inspector had received my envelope and was investigating, but the danger also increased. If Thomas suspected, he could act before planned. That night, during dinner, I noticed Thomas watching me intently as I served the roast. His gaze alternated between me and the family portraits, as if seeing us for the last time. A chill ran down my spine. "Eleanor," he said suddenly, "I think we'll have to reschedule that Historical Society banquet. I have to resolve some urgent matters." I swallowed hard. The banquet was scheduled for the day after the land deal. Would it be when the truth would finally come to light? "Of course, dear," I replied naturally, serving more roast. "The society will understand, won't they, Mother Vance?" His mother nodded, a slight frown on her face. After putting the household to bed, I found Thomas in his study, hunched over papers. The door was ajar, unusual for him. Was it a trap? "Thomas," I called softly. "I need some funds to buy materials for my historical research. Tomorrow, Dr. Albright wants to expand our project." He raised his eyes and for Anne. Instant, I saw something I had never noticed before. "Fear, of course," he said, taking some bills from his wallet. "More than I had asked for, much more. Buy something nice for yourself, too." I thanked him and withdrew, my heart pounding. He had never been generous without reason. Was it a farewell gesture or guilt? I returned to the bedroom and sat at the dressing table, brushing my long dark hair, still without a white strand at 22 years old. In the mirror, I saw a woman who no longer recognized the same features, but the eyes carried new knowledge, an iron determination. That night, while Thomas finally slept, I got up silently and went to the study. I adjusted Amelia's portrait. I brushed the dust from the forgotten journal. Silent tears ran down my face. I promised myself that regardless of what happened the next day, Amelia's truth would be known. Back in bed, I couldn't sleep. The clock marked the hours slowly, each tick-tock reminding me that time was running out for Thomas, for his family's carefully constructed narrative, and for the life I knew. Dawn broke. The day of the big land deal arrived with a cloudless blue sky. I dressed meticulously. I prepared breakfast as always. Thomas seemed distracted, constantly checking his watch. "I'll work late today," he announced, avoiding my gaze. "Don't wait for me for dinner. Any problem at the firm?" I asked innocently, serving more coffee. He hesitated for a second. "No, just bureaucracy. You know how it is." Before leaving, he did something he rarely did. He kissed my cheek, a lingering touch. His mother noticed the strangeness but said nothing. After Thomas left, I prepared for any scenario. I separated important documents, Amelia's letters, the locket, some family photos. I hid money in different places in the house in case I needed to leave in a hurry. I packed a small valise with essential clothes hidden under the bed. The day dragged on. I went to the Historical Society, shopped at the market, discussed research with Dr. Albright. Normal activities of a common housewife, while inside I was a volcano about to erupt. In the afternoon, Mrs. Jenkins quickly stopped by my house with the pretext of delivering a special order. "There are state police at the firm," she whispered while I arranged the flowers. "They arrived with documents for the land deal. Inspector Davies is with them. Mr. Vance Sr. is locked in the room with 3 men in suits." Thomas tried to leave, but they asked him to stay. I thanked her for the information with a nod, pretending to concentrate on my work. When she left, I sat in the parlor chair, trembling. It was happening. My plan was working. But what would come next? I took tea with Mrs. Gable and discussed new research projects, with the excuse of needing to finalize an urgent article without interruptions. If something went wrong, at least I would be safe. I returned home and waited. The sun was beginning to set, tinting the sky orange and red. The hours passed and no news. The dinner I prepared was getting cold on the stove. The house, usually bustling with activity, was immersed in an oppressive silence. At 8 o'clock, I heard sirens. My heart almost stopped. I ran to the window and saw 3 police cars passing quickly down the street toward the center of town where the firm was located. Half an hour later, loud knocks on the door startled me. I opened with trembling hands, expecting to find police officers. It was Lucinda, Thomas's sister, pale and breathless. "Eleanor, have you heard? Thomas and father were arrested. They're saying they tried to cover up an illegal land deal and manipulate historical documents. A scandal. The entire town is in an uproar." I pretended surprise and shock, grabbing the door frame as if I needed support. "It can't be. There must be some mistake." "There's no mistake," she replied, entering and closing the door behind her. Inspector Davies received an anonymous tip with evidence, documents, photos, everything. They had been altering records for years, and there was more. She hesitated, looking at me with a mixture of pity and embarrassment. "But what, Lucinda?" I asked, although I already knew the answer. "They found documents linking the firm to a century-old secret, a hidden child of Great Aunt Amelia. The entire family history is being questioned." I let myself fall into the chair, covering my face with my hands. I didn't need to pretend shock or pain. They were real, even though I already knew the whole story. One thing was discovering the truth in secret. Another was seeing it exposed to the whole town. "The family," I murmured. "Are they all right at your house?" "Yes," replied Lucinda, sitting beside me and holding my hand. "They can stay as long as necessary. Now we need to think about what you're going to do." What was I going to do? The question echoed in my mind while Lucinda talked about lawyers, police interrogations, and the inevitable scandal that would follow. I already knew the answer. Of course, I had planned every detail in the last few weeks. But at that moment, with reality finally crashing down on my head, I felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. My husband was a criminal. He was in jail. He had betrayed not only me, but the trust of an entire community. His family's history was a lie, and according to Amelia's letter, it had been covered up for generations. The life I knew was over. But somehow I was alive. Amelia's story was finally out, and for the first time in many years of marriage, the future, uncertain and frightening as it seemed, was in my hands. That night marked the end of the Eleanor I had been until then. The obedient wife, the dutiful historian, the invisible woman. The next day, when the sun rose, I would begin to forge a new version of myself. And that's exactly what I did. The news of Thomas and his father's arrest spread like wildfire. Our small town had never experienced a scandal of that magnitude. The law firm closed for 3 days for a complete audit. State police occupied the local station. Journalists from Boston and even from New York arrived to cover the case of the hidden history scandal, as they called it, because of Amelia's letters found during the investigation. I became overnight the truth seeker, the woman who had uncovered the scandal. Gazes followed me through the streets, some of pity, others of malicious curiosity, as if looking for signs of complicity or extreme ignorance in me. How did I not notice? How did I not suspect? What did I do wrong for such a deception to unfold? The morning after the arrest, I woke up at Lucinda's house. Thomas's parents were still sleeping, exhausted by the change in routine. I remember looking out the window and seeing a group of neighbors standing on the sidewalk, gossiping and pointing at the house. The news about Amelia, the hidden child, and the century-old cover-up had already leaked, probably through some indiscreet firm employee or police officer. "You don't need to face this now," said Lucinda, bringing me a cup of coffee. "Stay here until things calm down." But I knew that hiding would only feed more gossip. I took a bath, wore one of my best dresses, a simple green wool dress that I had sewn myself, and combed my hair carefully. I applied a little lipstick, something I rarely did on a common day. I'm going to the archives, I announced, taking my purse. The Historical Society needs an update on the records. Lucinda looked at me as if I had lost my mind. In the middle of this uproar, I can send my son to get it for you. I need to show my face, Lucinda. If I hide, they'll say I'm ashamed, that I knew everything, or worse. She didn't understand immediately. But years later, she confessed to me that was the moment she realized I was much stronger than everyone imagined. Walking to the archives that morning was like crossing a minefield. With each step, I felt the gazes, heard the whispers that ceased when I approached. At the market, silence fell when I entered. Ladies with whom I had exchanged recipes for years suddenly didn't know what to say. It was Mrs. Zamira, the inn's owner, who broke the ice. Mrs. Vance, good to see you. I was just commenting on how brave you're being through all this. Do you need any help with your research? I thanked her with a polite smile. I bought what I needed and left with my head held high. Inside, I was trembling like a leaf in the wind, but I would never let them see that. That small victory facing the market gave me strength for what would come next. At the state police station, I was informed I needed to go to the capital to give a statement. The authorities wanted to confirm I wasn't involved in the cover-up. The thought of facing Thomas in an official environment terrified me, but I had no choice. Dr. Albright will be fine with you gone for a day, Inspector Davies assured me, a middle-aged man with tired eyes. You'll be back the same day. 3 days after the arrest, I boarded the 5 a.m. bus to the capital. I wore a somber grey outfit that I had spent the previous night adjusting so it would look impeccable. I carried in my purse Amelia's letters, my grandmother's embroidered handkerchief, and the little money I had managed to gather. I didn't know what to expect. At the central police station, I was led to a room where 3 men awaited me. Inspector Davies, whom I knew only by sight, a prosecutor, and a clerk. They offered me coffee, which I accepted more to have something to occupy my trembling hands than out of thirst. Mrs. Vance, Inspector Davies began, we want to make it clear that you are not accused of anything. We're just trying to understand the whole scheme. Your husband and Mr. Vance Sr. maintained a sophisticated system of historical manipulation for at least 3 years. I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. Were you aware of these activities? Asked the prosecutor, observing me over his glasses. No, sir, I replied firmly. I discovered everything a few weeks ago by chance. I told him about the key in the attic, the investigations I made, the discoveries about Amelia and her hidden child. I omitted only that it had been me who anonymously sent the evidence to Inspector Davies. Something told me to keep this detail secret. The statement lasted almost for hours. They answered my questions about the legal process. They explained that Thomas's family would likely lose control of much of their estate, which was tied to the fraudulent land deals, and that Thomas and his father would face several years in prison. And what about the child? I asked, unable to keep the tremor from my voice. The inspector exchanged glances with the prosecutor before answering. We believe we have identified a living descendant of Amelia Vance, a woman in her early 60s living in a neighbouring state. She was raised in an orphanage and has no knowledge of her true lineage. We're currently making arrangements to contact her. We will work to ensure she receives justice and any rightful inheritance. I felt a strange lightness in my heart, not of triumph, but of profound satisfaction. Amelia's child, finally found. Before leaving, Inspector Davies called me privately. Mrs. Vance, we received an anonymous tip a few weeks ago. Documents, photos, concrete evidence of the scheme. It was you, wasn't it? I held his gaze without confirming or denying. Whoever it was, he continued, saved not only a vast amount of money from an illegal land deal, but also prevented innocent people from being harmed, including perhaps yourself. And you brought truth to a forgotten history. He handed me a card with his contact in the capital. If you need anything, don't hesitate to contact me. You demonstrated extraordinary courage. I returned home that night with the certainty that a phase of my life had definitely ended. On the bus, watching the landscape gradually darken, I made a promise to myself. Amelia's story would be told. I would live a dignified life, full of honesty and truth. The following days were a whirlwind. I received an official notification about the dissolution of Thomas's family firm. The house would be contested in legal proceedings. I had to explain to my in-laws in the most delicate way possible that their carefully constructed family history was a lie, and that Thomas and his father had done something very wrong. "Doesn't this disgrace us all?" asked Thomas's mother with her big eyes full of tears. "What happened has nothing to do with your worth as a family," I replied, hugging her. "Sometimes adults make serious mistakes and need to face the consequences, but the truth will set us free." Thomas's father, older and sensitive, asked if he could visit his son. I promised that when it was possible and safe, I would arrange it. This promise cost me more than he will ever know. Meanwhile, the small town buzzed with the scandal. Some friends distanced themselves, fearing association with the disgraced family. Others approached, offering practical help. Invitations for lunch, small research jobs, a place to stay. I discovered who my true friends were in those dark days. Clara, my friend from Boston, confirmed I could stay in the small room behind her shop. I began planning our move, selling the few pieces of furniture that belonged to me, packing memories, deciding what to take to our new life. A week after the arrest, I received an unexpected letter. It was from the descendant of Amelia Vance, now identified as Mrs. Agnes Miller. With delicate handwriting on perfumed paper, she expressed her profound gratitude for uncovering her true lineage. "He told me my parents had died young in a tragic accident, that I wasn't all fun," she wrote. "I believed because I wanted to believe. Now I carry a lifetime of questions about my identity and an uncertain future ahead. I don't ask for your friendship, just that you know you gave me back a piece of myself." I folded the letter carefully and put it away. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. But those words planted a seed that would only bloom years later. On moving day, I packed my few bags in the taxi and took one last look at the house where I'd lived for a year. I didn't feel sadness, just a vague relief. Those walls held more lies than truths. At the bus station, we found familiar faces who came to say goodbye. Lucinda hugged me long, promising to visit me in Boston. Mrs. Gable handed me an envelope discreetly. "A small grant," she whispered, "to start your new research. I know you'll continue your important work." The trip to Boston lasted for hours, but it seemed we were crossing to another planet. The buildings getting taller as we approached. As for me, I observed my reflection in the window glass. A 22-year-old woman, officially separated, without her own home, with an uncertain future ahead. Strangely, I didn't feel afraid. For the first time in many years, I breathed freely. Clara was waiting for us at the bus station. Her wide and sincere smile was like a ray of sunshine amid the fog. She hugged me long. "Welcome to your new life," she said simply. The small room behind the shop was smaller than I imagined. A single bed, a small table with one chair, a tiny wardrobe. The bathroom was shared with the shop, but it was clean. It had windows that let in natural light, and Clara had placed fresh flowers in a colourful vase. "It's temporary," she assured, helping us organise our things. "Soon you'll have your own space." That first night, after I finally settled in, exhausted from the trip and the novelties, I sat on the small back porch. The Boston sky was different. Fewer visible stars, more artificial lights, the constant noise of cars in the distance. Everything was strange, and yet I felt an inexplicable peace. There, under the unknown sky, I swore I would transform our tragedy into triumph. I would not just be the estranged wife of the criminal, the poor woman who exposed her family's secrets. I would be Eleanor, historian, truth seeker, independent woman, someone who found a forgotten key, and instead of burying the past, used it as a catalyst for her own liberation. The first months were extremely hard. I worked at Clara's antique shop during the day, categorizing items and helping clients. At night, when the shop was closed, I delved into historical archives, dreaming of the day I would have my own research projects. Money was counted penny by penny. Many nights, I cried silently, exhausted from work, worried about the future, hurt by memories. But when the sun rose, I washed my face, applied a little lipstick, and faced another day. Thomas and his father were sentenced to several years in prison. When the sentence appeared in the newspapers, I showed Clara not to feed anger or hurt, but so she would understand that actions have consequences, that choices define destines. "Will the truth really set us free?" Clara asked one evening. "Always," I replied. "It made serious mistakes, but it continues to be the only path, The first visit to the penitentiary for Thomas's mother was a trial. Seeing Thomas in uniform, thin and worn, made her cry throughout the entire encounter. Thomas's father remained silent, observing his son as if trying to reconcile this image with his memories. "Are you all right?" Thomas asked, avoiding my gaze. "We're starting over," I replied simply. "The family misses you," he tried to explain. To say he never intended to harm us, that the land deal got out of control, that the family secret was meant to protect Amelia's reputation. I didn't respond. Some lies don't even deserve the effort of being denied. Gradually, our life took shape in Boston. Clara taught me new business techniques, introduced me to potential clients, shared a knowledge about the antique business. After 6 months, I had my own research clients, individuals and institutions who appreciated my meticulous work and dedication to uncovering hidden histories. With the money I saved and Mrs. Gable's grant, we managed to rent a small apartment near Clara's shop. 2 rooms, a tiny living room, a kitchen where the 2 of us barely fit to have dinner. But it was ours. We bought second-hand furniture. I sewed colourful curtains, and Clara painted the walls of our shared living space. We transformed that rented space into a home. At night, when I finally had a moment just for myself, I thought about the woman I was and the woman I was becoming. The discovery of that silver key changed everything. Not just my destiny, but who I was inside. The submissive and insecure wife had been left behind along with the grand house in Vermont and the lies that sustained it. Sometimes I wondered about Agnes Miller, Amelia's descendant. Had she embraced her new history? Had she found peace with the truth? Would that distant relative, suddenly brought into the family fold, ever truly connect with the legacy? Life continued its course with small daily victories. My research expanded. My reputation as a historical consultant grew, and some of my articles were praised in academic journals and local history columns. It was 1968. I was 26 years old, and for the first time since I could remember, I felt in control of my own destiny. It wasn't rich. It wasn't easy, but it was authentic. It was mine. And it was then that destiny decided to bring another twist to our story. It was a Tuesday in November 1968 when the past knocked on my door. Literally, I had just turned 26 and finally began to reap the fruits of my hard work. My small research office, installed in the living room of our apartment, gained recognition among academics and local historical societies of Boston. It wasn't prestigious like the university departments, but I had loyal clients who appreciated my meticulous work and fair prices. That crisp afternoon, I was finalizing a genealogical report for the descendant of an important client when someone knocked at the door. Clara, then 28 years old, ran to answer before I could clean my hands full of documents. "Eleanor," she called with a hesitant voice that immediately alerted me. "There's a lady here with a small box." I put the documents in the case, quickly adjusted my hair, and went to the door. There, visibly nervous, was Agnes Miller. In her hands, a small, worn wooden box of approximately the same size as the one I had found in the attic. Time seemed to have frozen. I studied her face, her eyes mirroring a mix of apprehension and hope. Her hair, a striking auburn, framed a kind, strong face. "Sorry to appear like this," she finally said, her voice almost a whisper. I didn't know where else to go. For an instant, all the feelings I had repressed threatened to overflow. The ghost of Amelia, the weight of a century-old secret. How dare she appear at my door, bringing a tangible piece of the history that had appended my life? But then I looked at the worn wooden box, a silent testament to her own hidden past. An innocent woman who didn't ask to be born into that mess. "Come in," I said simply, opening the door wider. "You're clearly troubled." Clara watched the scene open-mouthed, trying to understand who this visitor was. "Clara, this is an acquaintance who needs help," I explained, avoiding labels or complex explanations at that moment. "Clara, please make some tea. We're going to talk." While Clara fulfilled her task, I indicated the sofa for Agnes. She sat on the edge as if fearing to occupy too much space, still holding the box firmly against her chest. "It's a family heirloom," she explained, trying to break the ice while Clara returned with the tea. "My adoptive mother left it to me. She always said it held a secret." "Now I understand." I offered tea and cookies, which she accepted with trembling hands. Clara, sensing tension in the air, made up an excuse to go attend to a client. When we finally were alone, Agnes began to speak, the words coming out like a dam that breaks after containing water for too long. I lost everything, Mrs. Vance. My adoptive parents were always distant. But after the news broke, they disowned me. They couldn't bear the shame of having a bastard child in the family, as they said. I tried to continue my life as a school teacher, but doors closed when they discovered my true lineage. She paused, sipping the tea to gain courage. My entire life, built on a lie, shattered. Inspector Davies told me everything. About Amelia, about her love, about her child, about the cover-up. He said you were the one who brought the truth to light. I came to thank you, and to ask for help. I returned the box without comments. I wasn't surprised by her story. It was the same pattern. Lives manipulated and discarded when they no longer serve certain purposes. I have nowhere to go, she continued, tears finally escaping. I'm sleeping in cheap boarding houses. The money is running out. I heard you opened a successful research office, that you're rebuilding your life. I didn't come asking for charity. I came asking for work. I can organize, type, assist with research, anything. I just need a start to rebuild my life. I looked at that woman, so close in age to myself, so desperate, and at the worn wooden box in her hands. She had the same determined chin as Amelia, the same artistic eyes. She was a living testament to the history I had uncovered, whether I wanted it or not. What right did I have to judge Agnes? She, too, had been deceived. She, too, had been discarded when she ceased to be convenient. The difference between us was that I had discovered the truth in time to prepare, to build an escape plan. She was caught unprepared with a lifetime of lies and empty promises in her ears. Do you have experience with historical research? I finally asked. She shook her head. No, but I learned quickly as a teacher. I know how to deal with details. I'm organized. I have a passion for truth. I took a deep breath, knowing that the decision I would make at that moment would change the course of several lives, not just mine. I have a small desk in the back, I said, pointing to a small extension of the apartment we used as a spare room. It's not much, but there's space for a desk and a small bed. As for work, I need someone to organize client files and assist with archival research while I focus on new projects. The salary won't be much at the beginning, but it includes the room and meals. Her eyes widened, alternating between disbelief and relief. You would accept me after everything. I'm not doing this for you, I replied honestly. I'm doing it for Amelia, whose story deserves to be told, and maybe a little for myself, too. I've carried anger and hurt for too long. It's time to let it go. That night, after Agnes was installed in the improvised room, I sat with Clara to explain the situation in the most delicate way possible. The lady who came today is Amelia's descendant, I said simply. The woman who represents the hidden history. She and her story need help, and we're going to help them for a while. Clara, always sensitive and intuitive, frowned. The descendant of the secret, the reason for all this. I was impressed with her perception. Yes, but she was also deceived like us, and the past is not to blame for anything. The adaptation wasn't easy. In the first days, Agnes could barely look me in the eye, ashamed and grateful at the same time. Neighbours gossiped when they saw us together at the market or taking research trips. The truth seeker and the descendant under the same roof was material for scandal in any era, especially in the conservative 1960s. But gradually a routine was established. Agnes had a natural talent for organisation and a keen eye for detail. In a few days, she reorganised the office, created a new filing system for clients, and took over all the administrative part once so neglected. With her taking care of these aspects, I could focus exclusively on new research projects, increasing our productivity. Clara adapted more quickly than I imagined. She embraced the role of supportive friend with enthusiasm, enchanted with Onez's stories of her journey. At night, after the office closed, sometimes we would talk in the small kitchen. To women united by a shared history, trying to understand how to move forward. How did you discover? She asked one night while mending a tear in one of her old maps. About us, about the family's secret. I told her about the key in the attic, the investigations, the evidence I gathered. She listened in silence, hands paralysed over the map. You sent the evidence to the inspector, she concluded, not as an accusation, but as recognition. That's why the truth was finally exposed. I did what I needed to protect the truth and myself, I replied. She nodded slowly. I would have done the same if I had known. On another night, when Agnes was feeling unwell, and we took turns watching over her, she confessed to me how she felt growing up with a hidden past. It was my first year as a teacher. I always felt a part of me was missing, a nameless ache. My adoptive parents dismissed it as imagination. Now I understand it was Amelia's story, trying to surface. It wasn't hard to understand how she had been affected. I myself, who only knew a fraction of the story, had been profoundly impacted. The months passed and something unexpected happened. We began to function as an unconventional family. We shared responsibilities, meals, small joys, and daily concerns. Agnes revealed herself to be an excellent researcher, enchanting clients with her meticulous attention to detail and ability to uncover obscure facts. I taught her the secrets of genealogical research, surprised by her ability to learn complex historical analysis techniques. The research offers prospered. With Agnes organizing the administrative part, I could accept more projects, including large institutional grants that paid better. At the end of 1970, we moved to a larger space, an apartment with 3 rooms in the same neighborhood with a spacious living room that we transformed into a more professional office. It was at this time that I received an unexpected visit. I was alone in the office finalizing a research paper when our receptionist entered hesitantly. Mrs. Vance, there's a gentleman called Mr. Vance Sr. wanting to speak with you. Mr. Vance Sr. The name caused a chill. Thomas's father, the man who had overseen the century-old cover-up. Send him up, I decided after a moment of hesitation. The man who entered my office was unrecognizable. The Mr. Vance Sr. I knew was elegant, always in a well-cut suit and impeccable hair. This man was thin, pale, with prematurely grey hair and deep dark circles. Thank you for receiving me, he said, refusing the coffee I offered. I was released 3 days ago, reduced sentence for good behaviour. I remained silent, waiting for him to explain the reason for the visit. I came to ask forgiveness, he continued, looking at his own hands. I know I don't deserve it, that you probably hate me. The cover-up was my father's idea. He feared the scandal would destroy the family's reputation. I believed, or wanted to believe. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, keeping my distance. Because I spent 3 years in prison thinking about the man I became, about what we almost did to Amelia's legacy. Thomas feels no remorse. You know, he blames everyone except himself. But I can't live with this weight anymore. I studied his face for signs of manipulation, but I saw only exhaustion and genuine shame. What do you intend to do now? I asked. Return to my hometown in the south. My brother has a small business there. He promised to give me a chance. I know I can never fully compensate for the harm I caused, but I want to try to live honestly from now on. When he got up to leave, he said something that surprised me. Your investigation saved many lives, did you know? Not just on Nez's. If we had managed to complete that land deal, many families would have lost their homes and savings. Your courage made more difference than you imagine. After he left, I stood at the window for a long time, watching the busy street below. Mr. Vance Sr.'s visit brought up memories I tried to keep buried, but also brought a strange sense of closure. The man who had perpetuated that century-old lie was repentant, seeking redemption. That didn't erase the past, but somehow made the present lighter. When Agnes returned with Clara from a research trip, I didn't mention the visit. Some bridges with the past are better left behind. 1971 brought new challenges and opportunities. Clara, now 30 years old, expanded her antique shop, opening a second location. Agnes, at 30, excelled more and more in historical research, becoming a specialist in turn-of-the-century social history. Our unconventional family, united by a shared history, now lived in a spacious house in the Beacon Hill neighbourhood with a small garden where we could relax and a dedicated office in the back, where I conducted my research when I needed silence. We had a part-time assistant who helped us with administrative tasks, a luxury unthinkable a few years before. Life finally seemed stabilised, like a boat that finds calm waters after a violent storm. Until one afternoon in July 1974, the past came to visit us again. I was at the office finalising a major grant application when our receptionist entered hesitantly. "Mrs. Vance, there's a man wanting to speak with you." He says he's Mr. Thomas Vance. The pen I was holding slipped between my fingers, slightly pricking my skin. Thomas, after 7 years in prison, he was free. A fact I knew would eventually happen, but for which I never felt completely prepared. "Tell him I'm busy," I replied automatically, a reflex of self-preservation. But then, looking at my research materials on Amelia, her whole life ahead of her, I thought about the woman I had become. I was no longer that insecure wife, intimidated by the mere presence of my husband. I was a respected historian, a truth seeker, a woman who had rebuilt her life from the ashes. "No, ask him to wait in the reception room. I'll finish in 15 minutes. I completed the application with hands that refused to tremble. I scheduled the final submission and took a deep breath before walking to reception. Thomas was sitting rigidly in one of the elegant armchairs, looking out of place in that academic and sophisticated environment. The years in prison had aged his face, completely white under his once dark hair. He wore a simple suit, clean but out of fashion, probably bought before his imprisonment. Our gazes met, and for an instant I was transported back to that kitchen in 1964, preparing breakfast for a man who planned to perpetuate a lie. "Or worse, Eleanor," he said, standing up. "Thomas," I replied with a calmness that surprised myself. "Let's talk in my office." I guided him through the office, aware of the curious glances from the assistants and interns. Many of them knew my story, or at least parts of it. Seeing the infamous ex-husband was like witnessing a legend character come to life. My office was a space that reflected who I had become. Organised, elegant, without ostentation, with Clara's art framed on the walls, and a large table where I could both design research projects and review historical documents. "You've built something impressive here," he commented, observing the environment. "What do you want, Thomas?" I asked directly, indicating he should sit while I took my place behind the desk. The power dynamic between us was clearly different now. "To see the family," he replied, looking at a photograph on my desk that showed Clara and Agnes at a recent conference. "I was released a week ago. I'm living in a boarding house near here. The truth has a way of catching up. They're no longer the people you left behind," I said. "I know," he said, rubbing his hands nervously. "I received the letters and articles you sent. Thank you for that, for maintaining that connection, even after everything." I nodded silently. Despite everything, I'd always kept my promise to keep the truth alive. I sent articles, historical reports, important news, allowed his father to visit him when he showed interest. Although these visits had become increasingly rare over the years. "I also want to see Agnes," he added, surprising me. "Agnes, you rejected the very truth of her existence. Her adoptive parent showed me your family's old cover-up documents." A blush of shame hid his aged face. "I was desperate, Eleanor. I thought it would be easier for everyone if I simply disappeared from your lives. But in prison, I had too much time to think, to regret." I studied his face, looking for signs of the old Thomas, the manipulator, the charming liar who had deceived not just me, but an entire town. I found only a worn, middle-aged man carrying the weight of his choices. "I can't decide for Agnes about seeing you," I finally replied. "As for the family, they're almost adults now. The choice to see you or not should be theirs." "That's fair," he agreed. "Are you with someone now?" The question caught me off guard with its irrelevance. What did my personal life matter to him? "My private life is none of your business, Thomas." "It hasn't been since the day I found that key." He lowered his head, accepting the reprimand. "I understand. I just wanted to know if you managed to be happy despite what I did." "I'm happy despite you. Not because of you," I replied, realizing the profound truth in those words. I built a life I love with people I value. The key that should have destroyed me ended up freeing me. When he left, I promised to inform the family about his return and let them decide if they wanted to meet him. I watched from the window as he walked down the sidewalk, shoulders slumped, a man diminished by his own choices. That night, I gathered Clara and Agnes in the living room. "Your father has been released," I announced without beating around the bush. "He came to the office today. Wants to see you, Clara," almost a woman now, crossed her arms defensively. In recent years, her connection to Thomas had practically ceased, replaced by an almost obsessive dedication to her antique shop. I have nothing to say to him, she declared with the firmness of young people who believe they have all the answers. Agnes, always more emotional, bit her lip, her eyes welling up. Did he ask about Amelia's story specifically? He asked about both of you, I replied softly. The decision is yours. I won't force you to do anything. Clara remained silent, but I noticed how her hands clenched nervously. The mere mention of Thomas still affected her despite the years and the new life she had built. He wants to see Agnes, too, I added, looking directly at her. Her eyes widened. After the centuries of silence, after the cover-up. Why now? He says he repented, that he had time to think in prison. A heavy silence fell over the room, each absorbed in their own thoughts and memories. I'll meet him, Agnes finally decided. Not for him, but for Amelia. I need to understand some things. Clara shook her head. I'm not ready yet. Maybe I never will be. In the days that followed, our home, normally a refuge of hard-won peace, became an emotional minefield.